Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to the fifth lesson of Simplified Tajweed series, which is a series of Tajweed lessons introduced by Quran University uniquely designed Quran learning management system with the purpose of introducing Tajweed in a modern and easy approach. Through this series of lessons, you will be introduced to Tajweed rules using a unique, modern and innovative approach to teach Tajweed that utilizes the color codes of Mus'haf al-Tajweed as a common denominator that links those lessons to Tajweed rules. With such approach, we aim to make the understanding of Tajweed rules much easier and to practically help you to apply those rules while reading the Quran. So, let's start Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim with our topic for this lesson, which is common pronunciation mistakes. Our objectives for this lesson is to quickly revise with you the articulation zones of Arabic letters that you have learned in the previous lesson, and to realize the common pronunciation mistakes of Arabic alphabet letters, and learn how to properly pronounce each letter, avoiding such mistakes while reading the Quran. In a previous lesson, we introduced the Arabic alphabet and the articulation and characteristics of its letters. We mentioned that the Arabic alphabet has 28 letters, while as we speak, the spoken alphabet has 29 letters, with one extra letter. It's primarily the written alphabet plus the Hamza, this one. Before we proceed to discussing the mistakes of pronunciation, let's revise what we have learned at a previous lesson on the articulation zones, where we mentioned that letters are grouped into categories based on their articulation zones. The first group of letters comes from the larynx, and we call it the laryngeal or below larynx or jawf letters, and basically those are the vowels, al-huruf al-jawfiyya. The second group comes from the throat, and thus it's called the throat or glottal letters, and they are called al-huruf al-halqiyya. The third group is what we call al-huruf al-khayshumiyya, or the nasal passages letters, which is basically the M and the N, al-huruf al-khayshumiyya, which has actually dual articulation zones. Each one of the M and N has another articulation zone. Labial letters, and those are two categories, the bilabial and the labiodental, al-huruf al-shafawiyya. And then we have the tongue or the lingual letters, al-huruf al-lisaniyya, which is further subdivided into several categories. The first one is related to the uvula, and basically we call it the uvular letters. Another category of letters is the group related to the wide area of the mouth, and we call it the palatal letters. These are the ones. And then we have a unique letter for the Arabic language, which is harf al-dad, idl. Then we have a group of letters that articulates at the tip of the tongue, and these are the ones we call it al-huruf al-dhalqiyya. Then we have a group which articulates in relation to the hard palate, and we call it the alveolar letters. Those are actually related to the roof of the mouth and the hard palate in this area, the front of the mouth. Then we have a group of letters that articulates in relation to the gums, and we call it dental letters or gum letters. And then we have a group of letters that articulates in relation to the lower incisor teeth, and they are called whistle letters. These are the ones. And also in that previous lesson, we explained what we mean by a letter characteristic and how such characteristics would differentiate letters sharing the same articulation zone. And then we categorized such characteristics into two major categories. First category is what we call intrinsic or basic characteristics, and the second category is the incidental or conditional characteristics. And the difference between the two is that in the intrinsic characteristics, the characteristics are always associated with the letter, and thus they are part of the intrinsic makeup of the letter. While in the incidental or conditional characteristics, the characteristics are not innate, where in this case the characteristics might be associated with the letter in certain occasions, while in other occasions they don't exist. So they are conditional to that particular occasion, and that's why they are not always associated with the letter, and hence not always intrinsic or basic characteristics. Now the basic intrinsic characteristics can be further divided into those characteristics with opposites, and those are 5 pairs, 5 by 2, a total of 10, and the other group are those characteristics without opposites, and they are 7. Now, the 10 characteristics are those, and we had explained each of them and its opposite in extensive details in that lesson. We've explained the loudness versus the whisper. We've explained the tension and the looseness, elevation versus depression, adherence versus opening, and explained labored versus fluent. And the other 7 are these, and some scholars added another 2 to make the total of 9. Now, these characteristics, some of them are considered as strength characteristics, given the color red in here, while the other group, given the color green, are considered weakness characteristics. And again, we explained quickly each one of those in the previous lesson. And on the right here, we have the list of the incidental conditional group of characteristics, and this is the list. And again, we went through it quickly, and we told you that each one of those would be explained in extensive details in following lessons during this series. And now, after that quick revision of the articulation and characteristics of the letters, we can now take each category of letters and discuss the common pronunciation mistakes related to each letter within that category. We'll start first with the al-huruf al-jawfiyya, jawf letters or the vowels. Articulation of the jawf letters comes from the larynx, and jawf means the empty space, either of the larynx, or some people at the early days used to say the jawf is the empty space of the mouth. Now, those letters are basically the vowel letters, and they are the alif, which is characterized by being loud, loose, and it follows the preceding letter in terms of velarization, tafkhim, or attenuation, tarqiq. The second vowel is the oo. The waw actually comes into 2 forms. The vowel, which is the extendable waw, and there is the non-extendable waw. So what we're discussing here is basically the extendable waw, which is the vowel. Extendable waw is loud, loose, depressed, open, and attenuated. The last vowel is the E. And again, the E has 2 forms, the vowel E and the non-extendable E. The vowel E is what we call the extendable ya, is characterized by being loud, loose, depressed, open, and attenuated. So let's start now with the alif common mistakes. The first mistake is not opening the mouth enough upon pronouncing the alif. And let's take an example. Musa, if we don't open the mouth with the a here, it will sound like this. Musa. The proper way is like this. Musa. Musa. So you have to make sure to open the mouth enough upon pronouncing the alif. The mistake, Musa. The proper, Musa. That's the first one. And the second mistake is mixing the alif with the sound of the ya. For example, the mistake is Maliki, me, yeah, a, sounding like an A in English, while it should sound like an A. So A is wrong, A is right. The proper way of pronouncing it is Maliki. Maliki. So you have to make sure the alif exits from the right articulation zone of the alif, and don't mix that with the A. A is right, A is wrong. So Maliki is wrong, Maliki is right. A is wrong, A is right. Third mistake is mixing the alif sound with a waw sound. For example, Khalidin, Fatul. So the Arabic A sounds like an O of the English language. Kho, to. This is wrong. The proper way of pronouncing it is Khalidin, Fatal. Khalidin, Fatal. And not tall. So please make sure to pronounce the alif from the right articulation zone and avoid pursing the lips upon pronouncing the alif so it wouldn't look like an O of the English language. A is the right thing, not O. The fourth mistake is basically velarizing the alif, making tafkhim instead of attenuating it, tarqiq. And the example is an-nahar, O instead of A, O is velarized, A is muraqqaq, attenuated. So the proper way of pronouncing this alif is
النهار.
So we have to adhere to the conditions of tafkhim and tarqiq. النهار is wrong, النهار is right. A is wrong, A is right here. The fifth situation is the opposite of the previous one, in which we attenuate the alif, we make tarqiq in the place where we should velarize the alif, in the place of tafkhim. An example of that is غائبة, غائبة, where we're supposed to say غائبة. So غ is attenuated, while A is tafkhim. غ instead of A tafkhim. Let's listen.
غائبة.
This is the right way of pronouncing it. غائبة, not غائبة. So again, we have to adhere to the conditions of tafkhim and tarqiq, like the previous one. So we notice from this that in certain situations we need to attenuate the alif, and in others we need to velarize it. And there is a complete lesson, especially existing for explaining what are the situations in which you have to make tarqiq to the alif and situation in which you have to do the opposite. And the sixth and the last common mistake of the alif in this group is basically mixing the alif sound with the ghunna sound, with nasalization. An example of that mistake is Ar-Rahman. To elicit this mistake further, close your nose with 2 fingers and pronounce the A. Ah. Remove the 2 fingers and pronounce the A. It will sound like A. Ah. A. Ah. A. So I'm actually flipping between pressing or closing my nose while pronouncing the A and opening it. And let's listen to the Muqri al-Husari in the proper way of pronouncing this.
Ar-Rahman.
So it's Ar-Rahman, not Mon. So avoid nasalization when pronouncing the alif. Make sure that the alif is pronounced without ghunna. Now we'll proceed to discuss the mistakes, the common mistakes associated with the extendable waw, the vowel. Now the vowel waw, again, is articulated from the jawf due to the vibration of the vocal cords with pursing of the lips, and it's characterized by being loud, loose, depressed, open, and attenuated. The first mistake is not pursing the lips enough when pronouncing the waw, so it sounds or ends up sounding like the English O. An example is تعلمون, while the correct way of pronouncing it, as we hear it from Sheikh al-Husari,
تعلمون.
So we have to make sure to purse the lips enough when pronouncing the waw, so to avoid the O sound. So basically it's تعلمون, not تعلمون. Ooh, not O. The second mistake is exactly the opposite of the first one. In the first, we didn't purse the lips enough. In the here, we exaggerate the pursing of the lips when pronouncing the waw, like يقولون. And let's compare that with the proper pronunciation as we hear it from Sheikh al-Husari.
يقولون.
So in here, we have to avoid exaggerated pursing of the lips when pronouncing the waw. يقولون, and not يقولون. The third mistake is mixing the waw sound with an alif sound, and it actually ends up being the same as the first one in producing the English O sounds. And the reason for that is basically that the oo is no more than an A plus pursing of the lips. So do that with me. Purse your lips as you pronounce the A. Ow. What you end up with is an oo. So mixing the waw with an alif is basically reducing the pursing of the lips and ending up with the English O. An example of that mistake is كانوا, كانوا, while we should pronounce it as كانوا, not O. And let's listen to Sheikh al-Husari in here.
كانوا.
كانوا. So make sure to pronounce the waw properly and not altering it into an O by mixing it with an alif and reducing its pursing. The fourth mistake of the waw is mixing the waw sound with a ya sound, E. And although this mistake is less common than the previously mentioned ones, yet it is still to be avoided. Example, yiqinin, yiqinin. This is wrong. It's supposed to be yuqinun. Let's listen to the Hawsari.
يوقنون
Yuqidun and not yiqinin. So make sure you pronounce the waw from its proper articulation zone and avoid mixing it with a ya. The last group of the mistakes of the waw is mixing its sounds with a gunna, nasalization. الظالمون. And the proper way is to pronounce it like this.
الظالمون
So, الظالمون, not to mix it with a nasal gunna. Don't say الظالمون. Thus, avoid nasalization when pronouncing the waw and make sure you pronounce it without gunna. And now, with the third vowel, the extendable ya. The extendable ya articulation was exactly like the a, where it comes from the jawf due to vibration of the vocal cords, but it is a modified a by lowering the jaw while pronouncing it. So it's e, the jaw is lowered. And the e, the extendable ya, is characterized by being loud, loose, depressed, open, and attenuated. And now, let's discuss its mistakes. The first common mistake is mixing the sound of the extendable ya with the sound of alif due to not depressing the jaw enough. Example, nasta'in. So, nasta'in is created because we didn't depress the jaw enough, and it sounds like something in between the e and the a. Nasta'in, something similar to the English a. Nasta'in instead of nasta'in. So let's listen to the proper pronunciation by Al-Hawsari.
نستعين
Nasta'in, not in. So we need to pronounce the ya from its proper articulation zone and avoid mixing it with the alif. The second mistake is actually giving gunna to it. Mixing the sound of the extendable ya with a gunna, nasalization. An example of that is al-alameen. The proper way to pronounce it is like Hawsari's pronunciation.
العالمين
Alameen. So we need to avoid nasalization when pronouncing the ya and make sure that we pronounce it without gunna. Let's proceed now to the common mistakes of the throat letters, al-huruf al-halqiyya. Throat letters has three categories. The first is the deep throat letters. Al-hamza. Al-hamza is characterized by being tense, loud, depressed, open, and attenuated. The second deep throat letter is Al-ha. The ha is characterized by being loose, whispered, depressed, open, and attenuated. Now, the mid-throat letters are the a, ain, is characterized by being loud, partially loose, tense, depressed, and open. And the second mid-throat letter is and the ha is characterized by being whispered, loose, depressed, and open. Now we have the upper throat letters, this area. The ghain is characterized by being loud, loose, elevated, and open. And the last one, which is the kha, is characterized by being whispered, loose, elevated, and open. And we'll start with the hamza mistakes. First common mistake is velarizing the hamza, giving it tafkhim. Let's take an example. We're making more of a tafkhim of the a. And the right way of pronouncing it, as we're going to hear it from Sheikh Al-Hawsari,
أصابعهم
أصابعهم. So we need to adhere to the conditions of the attenuation, tarqiq of the hamza. We shouldn't really velarize it. We don't say a, we say a. Second common mistake is Pronouncing the Hamza with extreme ease in situations where it shouldn't. An example of that is Ya ayyuha. Ya ayyuha. You're almost not hearing the Hamza, as if the A vowel is extending to the Ya vowel. Ya ayyuha. The right way of pronouncing it is, as we're going to hear from Sheikh Al-Husari,
يا أيها
Ya ayyuha. So it should be clear. You shouldn't make it so easy, and you shouldn't valorize it. So it should be in between. Now, the lesson here is you shouldn't exaggerate the easing of the Hamza where it shouldn't. And the last mistake of the Hamza is weakening its sound upon stopping at it. And the example would clarify that. The example is as-sama. So if I stop at the word as-sama, I don't pronounce as-sama. The Hamza is not pronounced, and I say as-sama. In that case, this is wrong. And the right way of pronouncing it is, as we hear from Sheikh Al-Husari,
السماء.
as-sama. So the Hamza should be pronounced. So you need to make sure that to emphasize upon the Hamza articulation point while pronouncing it, even at the stop situation. Now let's move to the Ha mistakes. The first mistake is velarizing the Ha, making tafkhim for it. Example, Allah, Allah, Ha. You shouldn't, in that case, make tafkhim, should be attenuated. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
الله.
Allah, without saying Allah is wrong. So we need to adhere to the condition of tarqiq for the Ha. The second mistake for the Ha is weakening the sound of the Ha upon ending the recitation or stopping on it. An example, explain that. فعلوا, فعلوا, without really making a Ha. فعلوا, as if it ends with a waw without a Ha. This is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is
فعلوا.
So there is a Ha, but it's a light one. فعلوا. Make sure to clarify the Ha. The third mistake of the Ha is weakening the sound of the Ha upon being followed by another Ha or a Ha. An example, جباههم, جباههم. That's not clear. The two Ha are not clearly identified from each other. And the right way of pronouncing it is
جباههم.
جباههم, huhum, not جباههم, جباههم. So make sure to emphasize upon the Ha articulation point when there is a double Ha, replicate Ha, or a Ha followed by a Ha. Now we proceed to discuss the Ain common mistakes. First mistake is truncating the pronunciation of the Ain when it is sakina, when it has sukun. Example, يعملون, يعملون. This is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is
يعملون.
يعملون. So the Ain should be clear. It shouldn't be truncated and as if we are pronouncing a يعملون. And the reason is Ain is partially loose. It is not so short and it's not so long. It's in between. It has what we call the characteristics between tension and looseness, and the Ain accordingly should be flowing there and should be apparent. يعملون. If we really make it so tense and so short, يعملون, it would sound as if it is a Hamza. يعملون. This is wrong. Second common mistake for the Ain is exchanging that Ain with a Hamza. So it's close to this in a way. Let's listen to the example which will clarify it. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. So it's almost the same. Allahu ya'lamu. If we say Hamza, it will be pronounced as ya'lamu. So it's a totally different word and it's totally a different meaning. And this is a tahrif of the Quran al-Karim. So the right way of pronouncing it is
والله يعلم وأنتم لا تعلمون.
So we should avoid replacing the Ain with a Hamza. And the third mistake of the Ain is velarizing it, making tafkhim for the Ain. And example will illustrate that. Also, we're making tafkhim. We're really extra velarizing that ayn. And the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
عصوا
عصوا, not عصوا, عصوا. A is wrong, A is right. So make sure the ayn stays attenuated and it has tarqiq. Now we'll proceed to the common mistakes of the ghain. Ghain, first common mistake is mixing the sound of the ghain with the sound of the qaf. Example, غير المغضوب. This is a ghain and we can pronounce it as a qaf, qayr instead of ghayr, maqdubi instead of maghdubi. So this is wrong. The right way is pronouncing it like that.
غير المغضوب
غير المغضوب, clear ghain, not qaf. So qayr is wrong, ghayr is right. So we have to pronounce the ghain at its right articulation and not at a qaf articulation. Second mistake for the ghain is merging it, making idgham of the ghain into a qaf. The difference between the first and the second here is mispronouncing the ghain into a qaf. Here, no. Merging the ghain into a qaf, as we'll see in the example. لا تزغ قلوبنا. So basically here we have a ghain followed by a qaf. In here it was a ghain that we exchanged it with a qaf. So here, in the second example, the ghain followed by the qaf. So some people would tend to eliminate the ghain and directly merge the two letters together, taking the ghain into the qaf and merging it, and that's what we call idgham. So saying لا تزغ قلوبنا is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is
لا تزغ قلوبنا
لا تزغ قلوبنا, clear, obvious ghain followed by a qaf, not merged together, not merging the two letters, the ghain and the qaf together. Each one pronounced independently and clearly. The third mistake is exchanging the ghain with the kha. Example, yakhsha. We have a ghain here, and instead of pronouncing yaghsha, we pronounce yakh, yakhsha. This is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is
يغشى
yaghsha. So we shouldn't replace the ghain with a kha. The fourth mistake of the ghain is giving qalqala to the ghain. غير المغضوب مغضوب مغضوب. This is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
غير المغضوب
غير المغضوب, no qalqala. So take in consideration the softness characteristic of the ghain, which doesn't allow it to be having qalqala. The fifth common mistakes of the ghain is exaggerating the velarization of the ghain, giving extra tafkhim for it, especially when it has a kasra, when there is a kasra on the ghain. An example is min ghil. You can see the kasra below the ghil, and the way it's been pronounced is wrong. Min ghil. This is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
من غل
Min ghil. So we don't over-velarize or exaggerate the tafkhim of the ghain. And now with the ha mistakes. The first mistake for the ha is exchanging the ha with a kha or ghain. For example, alhamdu. Some people would pronounce the ha with a kha, al-khamdu, or with a ghain, al-ghamdu. And both are wrong. We should pronounce the ha as a ha, like this, alhamdu, hamdu, and not khamdu or ghamdu. So avoid such replacement of the ha with these two letters. Second mistake is merging idgham, the ha, into the following ayn. An example, فاصفح عنهم. We have two words, the first word ending with a ha with sukun, and the second word starting with a ayn. Idgham means merging the last letter here, the ha, with the first letter ayn, and eliminating the ha and replacing it with a ayn. It will be pronounced as فاصفح عنهم, فاصفح عنهم. No ha, directly the fa to the ayn, فاصفح عنهم. And that's basically idgham, the ha into the ayn. And that's wrong. We should pronounce it clearly. فاصفح عنهم. A ha should be clear and should not be merged into the ayn. And the third mistake of the ha is not whispering it enough. Poor whispering characteristic of the ha. An example is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Ha, when it's whispered, it spreads a little bit. Ha. Making it shorter, is basically reducing the whispering characteristic. So saying Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim is not right. The right way of pronouncing it is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, giving it some length. And that's basically what we call the whispering characteristic of the ha. In conclusion, you need to take into your consideration the whispering characteristic of the ha, and you shouldn't truncate it and make it so short. Give it the length that allows it to be whispered. Now, the mistakes of the kha. First mistake is pronouncing the kha without velarizing it, without tafkhim. Khalidin, Khalidin, kha. While if we allow kha to be having tafkhim, it will be kha, not kha. So let's listen to the right way of pronouncing it. Khalidin,
خالدين
Khalidin, kha, not kha, kha, not kha. Make sure to give the kha its tafkhim characteristics. Now the second mistake is exaggerating the velarization of the kha, the opposite of this, especially when there is a kasra below it. Wakhifa. And the right way of pronouncing this word and this letter is
وخيفة
Wakhifa. So it should have the relative tafkhim characteristic in the kha when there is kasra. Now we proceed to another group of letters, the nasal passages letters, and discuss the common mistakes of those. Al-Huruf al-Khayshumiyya. And those nasal passages letters, Al-Huruf al-Khayshumiyya, has two letters actually. The first one is the M, the meme, and the meme has two articulation zones, oral and nasal. The nasal is here and the oral is here. So the oral is bilabial and the nasal is the one that gives the gunna characteristic to the meme. On the other hand, the meme is characterized by being partially loose, apparent, lowered, and open. The second letter is the noon, and the noon is similar to the meme in the fact that it has two articulation zones, an oral one and a nasal. And the oral one is basically the tip of the tongue opposite to the gum of the upper incisor. Here, this area is the articulation of the noon. And the nasal articulation is what gives it ghunna again as the air passes while pronouncing the noon through the nose. It gives its characterized nasal tone. Now, noon pronunciation is dependent on the letter that follows the noon, leading for the noon to either appear, and we call that idhar, or disappear, and we call that ikhfa, means disappearance, or become merged into the following letter, and we call that idgham, or become flipped with a totally different letter, and that's what the meaning of iqlab is. And the characteristics of the noon is being partially loose, apparent, lowered, and open. Now let's check the common mistakes of the meme. First mistake is amputating the meme sound upon a stop. An example of that is Ar-Rahib, Ar-Rahib, almost not pronouncing the meme here. And the right way of pronouncing it here is
الرحيم
Ar-Rahim. So even if we stop at the M of Ar-Rahim, the meme should be expressed, and the reason is that it's a bit loose. Loose letter means it's not tense, not so short, not and not loose, which is too long. It's a partial looseness in between the two. So this meme should appear and should not be truncated. The second common mistake is giving qalqala to the meme while it has sukoon, while it's in the still state. Yamtarun, yam. This is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
يمترون
Yamtarun. We don't say yam. So there should be no qalqala given to the meme. The third mistake is velarizing the meme, which means awarding it a tafkhim when it is followed by a velarized letter. An example of that is this. Makhmasa, makhmasa. Kha and Sad are velarized letters, حروف مفخمة. So subconsciously the person tends to also add tafkhim, velarization for the meme, which is preceding the kha, or the meme preceding the sad. And it's wrong to do that. Makhmasa is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is like this. Makhmasa, makhmasa, but not makhmasa. So make sure to give the meme the attenuation characteristic, the tarqiq, that should be given to this letter. Now we'll proceed with the common mistakes of the noon. First mistake is giving qalqala to the noon while it has sukoon, while it's in the still state. Example is this one. And this shouldn't be the case for the noon. It should be pronounced without qalqala. The meme should not have qalqala because it is in the states of partial looseness. So it should be pronounced like this. An'amta, not an'amta. An'amta is the right way to pronounce it. The second mistake is vibrating the gunna of the noon when stressed by shadda. Such sound disturbance is also called intonation, and it's a very strange one, but some people do that, and this is how it is. The mistake is like this. And this is wrong. The right way is to pronounce it properly and simply without such intonation. So the gunna of the noon should not be intonated, and it should be always in a straight tone. And the third mistake is velarizing the noon, awarding it a tafkhim when it is followed by an alif bal. Let's see the example. An-nar. This is wrong. An-nar. This is basically giving the noon a tafkhim, velarization, while it should be pronounced like this. An-nar, not an-nar. So the alif vowel that came after the noon should not give it a tafkhim. Some people, because the a could be velarized, they tend to also velarize the noon before, and this is not right. And as we said, the right way is to say an-nar, not an-nar. So make sure you give the noon the attenuation characteristic, the tarqiq characteristic that it should have. And now we will proceed to the common mistakes of the labial letters. Let's first revise quickly the labial letters articulation and characteristics, starting first with the bilabial letters. First bilabial letter is the ib, and the ba is characterized by being loud, tense, open, depressed, and with qalqala. The second bilabial letter is the m, and the meme is characterized by being partially loose, tense, loud, depressed, and open. The third bilabial letter is the waw غير المادية, and this unextendable waw is characterized by being loud, loose, depressed, and open. Now we're left with one labial letter, which is a labiodental letter, comes between the lips and the teeth, and that is the if. The fa is characterized by being whispered, loose, open, depressed, and attenuated. Let's start by discussing the common mistakes for the ba letter. The first mistake of the ba is whispering the ba so it sounds like an English P. Example. Bismillah, Bismillah, P. Bismillah. This is wrong. It should be like this. Bismillah. Bismillah. So the proper way is to pronounce the Arabic ba like the English B and not the P. The second common mistake of the ba is basically depriving the ba from the qalqala characteristic when it has sukoon, when it is in a still state, such as yubsirun. Instead of saying yubsirun, we say yubsirun. So ba needs to be having qalqala characteristic, yub, especially when it has the sukoon, it has the still state. So saying yubsirun is not proper. The right way to say it is yubsirun. Yubsirun. Make sure to give the ba the enough qalqala characteristic. The third common mistake of the ba is velarizing it, making tafkhim when followed by a velarized letter. الباطل باطل. So باطل instead of باطل. So the right way of pronouncing it is باطل, not باطل. So make sure to attenuate the ba, give it tarqiq, not tafkhim. We've mentioned earlier that the meme has a dual articulation, oral and nasal, and the common mistakes of the meme has already been discussed before when we discussed the nasal articulation. So let's proceed with the unextendable wow common pronunciation mistakes. And the first one is velarizing the unextendable wow, making tafkhim for it, when followed by a velarized letter. An example is Wallah, Allah. Allah is already velarized, the lam in the lafz al-jalala, in the letter, the word of Allah. And so being preceded by a wow, people would tend to automatically velarize it. So say wa rather than wa. So they say wallah. And the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
Wallahu.
Wallahu. So we don't velarize the wow. Wa, not wa. So make sure to attenuate the unextendable wow in such situations. Second mistake is incomplete pursing of the lips. Wakana. So in wow you should say oo, purse your lips. But the problem arises, especially when you have a fatha, you might tend to decrease that pursing. So it will be like wakana, and this is wrong. Wakana is wrong. It should be wakana. So let's listen to the right way of pronouncing it from Sheikh Al-Hasari.
Wakana.
Wakana. Wakana. So make sure to purse the lips enough. And now the common mistakes of the letter fa. First mistake is weakness of the whisper characteristic of the fa. F has a whisper. And if we reduce that whisper, what happens? Taf'alun. So rather than taf'alun, it becomes like if it is really amputated. Taf'alun. You have to give it enough whisper characteristic. And the right way of pronouncing it is
Taf'alun.
Taf'alun. This is not qalqala. This is just giving it enough time to let the whisper characteristic appear. So make sure to give the fa the whisper characteristic. The second mistake is exchanging the fa with the English V. Example. وَالضَّفَادِعْ وَالضَّفَادِعْ. So rather than saying وَالضَّفَادِعْ, we say وَالضَّفَادِعْ, V instead of F. The right way of pronouncing it is
وَالضَّفَادِعَ.
وَالضَّفَادِعْ. So please make sure not to replace the fa with a V. And now the uvular letters. Uvular letters are actually the first category of the tongue letters related to the uvula here and the soft palate just in front of it. The first letter is related to the uvula and it is the iq, qaf. And the qaf is characterized by being loud, tense, open, elevated, velarized, having tafkhim. The second uvular letter is basically related to the area just in front of the uvula, the soft palate here, and it's called the ik, and it's called the kaf. The kaf is characterized by being whispered, tense, open, depressed, and attenuated, which means that it has tarqiq. So the kaf has tarqiq, it's attenuated, while the qaf has tafkhim, and it's velarized. Let's start with the mistakes of the qaf. Qaf, first mistake is weakening the tafkhim of the qaf, resulting in replacing it with a kaf. As we have just mentioned, the kaf is more muraqqaq, having less tafkhim. So an example of that would be وَبِالْحَكِّ أَنزَلْنَاهُ وَبِالْحَكِّ نَزَلْ. Actually, we are replacing the qaf with a kaf. So saying بِالْحَكِّ instead of بِالْحَقِّ is wrong. And the right way of pronouncing it is like Sheikh Al-Husari's pronunciation in here.
وَبِالْحَقِّ أَنزَلْنَاهُ وَبِالْحَقِّ نَزَلْ.
بِالْحَقِّ is right. بِالْحَكِّ is wrong. You have to make sure to pronounce the qaf attenuated enough and from the right articulation zone to differentiate it from the kaf. The second common mistake of the qaf is exchanging it with the letter G, English G. So example of that would be Galil, Galil. Instead of qalil, we use the English ig. It will be galil, and this is wrong. The right way of pronouncing the qaf here is like this.
قليل.
Qalil. So you have to make sure not to replace the qaf with the ig, English G. Third mistake is replacing the qaf with a ghain. Example is في ليلة الغدر. في ليلة الغدر. غدر. This is wrong. It means a totally different meaning from qadr. Qadr and ghadr are totally different words. And the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
في ليلة القدر.
Qadr. So make sure not to replace the qaf with a ghain. The next common mistake is whispering the qaf. Whispering is like this. قالوا قالوا قالوا. The qaf is not clear enough. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
قالوا.
قالوا قالوا. So the qaf is an apparent character. And you should make sure to give the qaf its apparent characteristics. قالوا, not قالوا. قالوا, not قالوا. And now the kaf common mistakes. The first mistake is an exaggeration in whispering the kaf when it has haraka, when it is mutaharrika. Example, kuwirat, kuwirat. We see now here the kaf has a dhamma. Kuwirat, kuwirat. Because of a waw after it and the dhamma over it, the person pronouncing it tends to exaggerate that dhamma. Kuwirat, kuwirat. So that the whispering would be extended and exaggerated. And this is not right. The right way of pronouncing it is to make it less whispered and less exaggeration of that whispering, like what you're going to hear now.
كورت.
Kuwirat, without an extension of the ku. So make sure to give the kaf the acceptable whisper level. The next mistake is pronouncing the kaf as if it is a qaf. وَتَرَقُوكَ قَائِمًا وَتَرَقُوكَ. Instead of kuka, quka, wataraquqa. And this is wrong. They are two different letters and they shouldn't be exchanged with each other. The right way of pronouncing this is
وتركوك قائما.
وتركوك قائما. And people tend to do this mistake because of the close by qaf. And since the kaf and the qaf near each other in the articulation point, subconsciously they might, because of the qaf which is coming here, they mispronounce the kaf here as a qaf. So the pronunciation is وَتَرَكُوكَ قَائِمًا. So please make sure not to mix the kaf with the qaf. The last mistake for the kaf is the opposite of the first one. In the first we were exaggerating the whispering. Here we're not whispering at all. We're not whispering the kaf enough when it has sukoon, when it is in the still state. An example of that was this. Vik, rak, vik, rak. And let's listen to Sheikh Al-Husari pronouncing it properly. Concentrate on the kaf. Vikrak. So there is some whispering left there, and what you need is to make sure to award enough whispering characteristic to the kaf to make it apparent and not to amputate it. Next we'll discuss the common mistakes of the palatal letters, al-huruf al-shajariyah. Palatal letters are actually a group of the lingual letters, and this group is called palatal or shajariyah because they are related to the palate, to this area here. And the first one of those is the ish. We call it the sheen, which is characterized of being whispered, loose, depressed, and open. The second one of this group is the ij, jim, which is characterized of being tense, loud, depressed, and open. The third one is the e, غير المادية, the non-extendable or unextendable ya. And this one is characterized of being loose, loud, open, depressed, and attenuated. It has tarqiq characteristic. So the ya غير المادية is different from the extendable ya, which is a vowel. And we'll start with the common mistakes of the sheen. The first one is weakening the sheen sound due to poor dependence on its articulation point. Let's give an example. اشتروا, اشتروا, اشتروا. So we barely can hear the sheen. And the right way of pronouncing it is
اشتروا.
اشتروا. So we need to make sure to pronounce the sheen clear enough. Second mistake is velarizing the sheen giving it tafkhim when it is followed by a velarized letter. And this will be apparent with the following example. Shatata, shatata. Pa is a velarized letter, and having the sheen before it makes the person tend to also give it velarization, tafkhim, and the person tends to pronounce it wrongly as shatata, while the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
شطط
Shatata, shatata. So we don't velarize the sheen, yet we velarize the two letters following it. So you have to take into consideration the tarqiq characteristic of the sheen and avoid velarizing it when not indicated. The third common mistake of the sheen is exchanging the sheen with a sin or mixing the two together. For example, من الشيطان. In this case, we've started a sin before the sheen, من الشيطان, or totally replacing the sheen with a sin, like saying من الشيطان. In both cases, it's wrong, and the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
من الشيطان
من الشيطان. Make sure not to replace the sheen with a sin or mix it with it. Now we'll take the jim mistakes. First mistake is weakly pronouncing the jim. Example, جعلوا. In this case, we can barely hear the jim, and the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
وجعلوا
جعلوا. So the jim should be awarded its strength characteristic. It should be clear enough. جعلوا. Now, another mistake is mixing the sound of the jim with the sound of dal. This is the dal. Example, يدجمعون, يدجمعون, يدجمعون. And this is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
يجمعون
يجمعون. So make sure not to mix the sound of the jim with that of the dal. Now, the third mistake is mixing the sound of the jim with the sound of the sheen. Sh. And the example showing the wrong pronunciation is المشاهدين. المشاهدين. Musha is wrong. We're pronouncing a sheen instead of the jim. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
مجاهدين
المجاهدين. Mujah, not musha. So make sure not to mix the sound of the jim with that of the sheen. The fourth mistake is replacing the jim with the ya. This is common in some Gulf states where they say instead of the jim they replace it with the ya, and it sounds like this. Al-masjid. Al-masjid. Yid instead of jid. So the proper way of pronouncing it is المسجد الحرام. المسجد. Jid and not al-masjid. So make sure not to replace the jim with the ya. And the last mistake is exchanging the jim with the English g. Example, al-hajj ashhurun. Al-hajj. And this is a common mistake in the Egypt area. Al-hajj. The right way of that is to say al-hajj, not al-hajj. So let's hear the proper pronunciation.
الحج أشهر
الحج. الحج أشهر معلومات. الحج. Make sure not to exchange the jim with the egg. And now the common mistake of the ya غير المادية. The first mistake is exaggerating the stress on the extendable ya. الياء غير المادية. An example of that would be أينما. أينما. أي. That's, we're really stressing the ya here. And the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
أينما
أينما. So avoid extra stressing on the ya. Second mistake is giving ya غنة, nasalization sound. Example, الدنيا. Okay? And the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
دنيا
Dunya, not dunya. Dunya is right. Avoid giving غنة to the ya. Now we'll move to the common mistakes of the letter Dad. Dad is a very unique character in the Arabic language, and it has the following articulation. It comes as a lingual letter opposite to the upper molar. And it is characterized of being adherent, loose, loud, elevated, and velarized. It has a tafkhim characteristic. Arabic language is sometimes called the language of the bad because it's really difficult for beginners to pronounce it correctly. Those who are learning Arabic for the first time, if they don't have a similar letter in their language, they really find difficulty and tend to replace that letter with alternative letters like the id or t, as we're going to see. So it's very, very important to realize the common mistakes of the bad and to try as much as possible to avoid those mistakes in order to pronounce the bad properly. The first common mistake of the bad is replacing it with the va. فقد ظل. And this is again a common mistake even in Arabic, certain countries. And the proper way of pronouncing it is like this.
فقد
ضل, not ظل. ضل, ba, not va. So avoid replacing the bad with a va. Second common mistake is replacing it with a dal, id. An example, تفيدون. And this is really a common mistake for those learning Arabic for the first time. Bad is a bit difficult for them to pronounce, so they tend to replace it with a dal. They would say تفيدون instead of تفيضون. And actually تفيدون has a totally different meaning, and it's a very obvious lahn. So the right way of pronouncing this is تفيضون. You should avoid replacing the dal with a dal. A third mistake is giving qalqala to the bad, like this. وقضبا. While the right way of pronouncing it is like this. وقضبا. قضبا. Without qalqala, without stressing it so much. You have to make sure to keep the bad loose and avoid giving it qalqala. The fourth mistake is mixing the sound of the bad with that of a sound of nasalization, giving it gunna. Fadlullah. While the right way of pronouncing it is like this. Fadlullahi. Fadl, without giving it gunna. And the last mistake of the bad is merging it with the following or coming or next letter. Example, arradtum. Now there's a ta after the bad, and you tend to delete or hide the ba and directly pronounce the r with the ta. Arradtum. Arradtum. This is some sort of idgham, and this is wrong. Idgham is not a character of the bad, and we should avoid it, and the right way of pronouncing it is like this. So the bad should be clear and obvious. Arradtum. We'll proceed now with the common mistakes of the tip of the tongue letters, al-huruf al-dalqiyya. Those letters are actually a group of the lingual letters, and they are articulated between the tip of the tongue and the nearby area. First is L, lam. The lam is characterized by being partially loose, loud, depressed, and open. Second letter is N, and the N we have mentioned before because it has a dual articulation point. It's a nasal, it comes from the nasal passages as well as from the tip of the tongue. So it has a dual articulation. And the Noon is characterized of being partially loose, loud, depressed, and open as well. The third is the R, and the Ra is characterized of being partially loose, loud, depressed, and open also. First mistake of the lam is velarizing it, giving it tafkhim where it should have been attenuated, giving tarqiq. Example is al-latif, al-latif, latif, giving tafkhim for the lam, velarizing it. While in this case it should have been attenuated, like this.
Al-latif.
Al-latif. So not al-latif, but al-latif. So you need to adhere to the conditions of tafkhim and tarqiq. Lam in other situations could be the opposite, and the mistake here would be giving the lam attenuation, tarqiq, where it should have been velarized, tafkhim. And an example of that is
من الله.
saying min Allah. Actually, it should have been min Allah. Lam here should have been given tafkhim. So the right way of pronouncing this,
من الله.
Allah, not Allah. So here, min Allah, not min Allah. Min Allah is wrong. So we have to adhere again to conditions of tafkhim and tarqiq. There are situations where there is tafkhim, and there are situations where there is tarqiq. And there is a special lesson that explains this and when to perform tafkhim or tarqiq for the lam. The third mistake is merging the lam into the next letter.
أنزلنا.
After the lam there is a noon. So if we do idgham of the lam, we practically eliminate the lam and directly pronounce the za followed by the noon. أنزلنا. And this is wrong. There is no idgham for lam, and that merging shouldn't exist. And the right way of pronouncing it is like this. أنزلنا. So the lam should be clear and obvious. It should never be merged or mudgham. So avoid merging the lam into the following letter. The fourth mistake is merging the lunar lam into the jim. There is a complete lesson about the lunar lam, and so don't worry about it, but now just be oriented with the mistake. An example of that, saying الجبال. Directly they have the alif followed by the jim as if there is no lam. الجبال. But this is wrong. Al-jibal is the right way of pronouncing it. It's like this.
الجبال.
Al-jibal. So we should not say al-jibal. We should not eliminate the lam. Again, there is no idgham or merging of the lunar lam into the jim. Another example is min al-jinnati. Some people would say min al-jinnati wan-nas, and that's wrong. Another example is ashabul jannati. Again, that's wrong. The right way here is ashabul jannati. Min al-jinnati. Al-jibal. There is no idgham, no merging for the lam, and the lam should always be existed in those cases. The last mistake is giving ghunna for the lam, a nasal tone.
بالله.
And that's wrong. And the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
بالله.
Billah, not billah. That's wrong. Ghunna should not be associated with the lam. And these are the common mistakes of the noon. I'm not going to repeat them because we've mentioned them previously when we've mentioned the nasal articulation of the noon. As we said, the noon has dual articulation, nasal and oral. And so this has been already expressed and explained at an earlier stage. We'll proceed now with the common mistakes of the ra, and the first one is replacing the ra with a ghain.
الرحمن الرحيم.
الرحمن الرحيم. Gha instead of Ar-Rahman. Gha instead of Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim is wrong, and the proper way of pronouncing it is
الرحمن الرحيم.
Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. We need to avoid replacing the ra with a ghain. Second mistake is velarizing the ra, giving it tafkhim, where it should have been attenuated and given tarqiq. An example of that is
مذكر.
مذكر. Tafkhim, velarized, while the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
مذكر.
مذكر. So we don't give tafkhim. We have to adhere to the conditions of tafkhim and tarqiq and not to velarize the ra in this case. The third mistake is exaggerating the ra repetition. Like this.
الرزاق.
الرزاق. This is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
والرزاق.
الرزاق without الرزاق. You have to realize that mild repetition is a proper characteristic of the ra. But the wrong thing is to overdo this, to exaggerate the repetition. So saying al-Razzaq, there is a little repetition there, but al-Razzaq is what's wrong. The next mistake is pursing the lips while pronouncing the ra.
الرحيم.
الرحمن الرحيم. So it gives it a wow sort of a sound. This is wrong. There is no Ar-Rahman. It's Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman. So Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim is wrong. And the right way of pronouncing it is
الرحمن الرحيم.
Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. So you need to avoid pursing the lips while pronouncing the Ra. Another mistake is pronouncing the Ra either extremely tense or extremely loose while in Sukun state. Let's take the word khusr as an example. Khusr is the right way of pronouncing this. But if we really make it so tense and short, it will sound like this. Khusr, as if there is a hamza or there is no Ra. Khusr. This is wrong. So extremely tense is wrong and extremely loose is wrong. Khusr. Khusr is also wrong. So the right way of pronouncing it is khusr. And in between situation, between tension and looseness, in Arabic we call it tawassut. So it's neither loose nor tense, and that's why we are calling it partially loose. Khusr. Khusr. So you have to make sure to give the Ra the partial looseness characteristic. Not extremely tense, not extremely loose. We'll proceed now with the common mistakes for the alveolar letters, al-huruf al-nat'iyya. Alveolar letters are actually among the groups of the lingual letters, and they are related to the hard palate, to this area of the hard palate that has these ridges. The first alveolar letter is the ta, it. The ta is characterized of being tense, loud, elevated, adherent, pillarized, having tafkhim, and associated with qalqala. The second letter is id. The dal is characterized of being tense, loud, depressed, open, attenuated, tarqiq, with qalqala. The ta, is characterized of being tense, whispered, depressed, open, and attenuated, having tarqiq. So let's start with the common mistakes associated with the letter ta. First mistake is whispering the ta. Fatal, fatal, instead of saying
فطال.
fatal. So you need to make sure to give the ta the loudness characteristic. While the second mistake is attenuating the ta, so it would sound as if it is a ta. Example, tibaqa, tibaqa, ti instead of ti. Tibaqa, this is wrong. We need actually to pronounce it as a ta, like this.
طباقا.
طباقا. So you need to make sure to give the ta its velarization characteristics so as not to mix it with the ta. And now with the common mistakes of the dal. First mistake is mixing the sound of the dal with the sound of the ta. Like at-teen, 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 instead of ad-deen. Id is the right way, id. And it is wrong. So the proper way of pronouncing this is like this.
الدين.
So you need to make sure not to mix the dal with the ta. Ad-deen. The second common mistake for the dal is velarizing the dal to a level that it would sound as if it is a dad. Let's listen. Sudur, sudur, sudur. So the da has been giving a velarization. The dal and the dad are from the same articulation point. So giving the dal an extra velarization would make it sound like a dad. And this is wrong. What we need to pronounce it like is like this.
صدور.
Sudur, sudur, and not sudur. So you need to make sure the dal remains attenuated enough so it wouldn't be mixed with the dad. Let's proceed now with the common mistakes for the ta letter. First mistake is exaggerated whispering of the ta when it has a haraka, when the ta has a haraka, not sukun. Example is تَتَوَفَّاهُمْ. We whisper the ta, each ta, more than what's necessary. تَتَوَفَّاهُمْ. And as we realize, each ta here has a fatha, They have harakat, they don't have sukoon, and that makes us tend to lengthen the ta as we whisper it. And if you remember from the previous lesson on characteristics, whispered letters tend to have a longer time. Ta, ta, waffahum. But this is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is like this. تتوفاهم and not تتوفاهم. So you need to avoid exaggerated whispering during haraka state for the ta. The second mistake is the opposite of the first one. In this case, we totally eliminate the whispering characteristic of the ta and we make the ta as if it is very short, where you would barely hear the whispering of the ta. Example, تتمارى, تتمارى. And again, this is wrong. And the right way of pronouncing it is like this. تتمارى. So you need to make sure to give the ta its whisper characteristic. The last mistake of the ta is velarizing it to a level that would make it sound like a ta rather than a ta. An example of that is تطمئن, تطمئن, tat. You have here ta, ta, tat. Because a velarized letter comes after the ta, it makes the person tend to make it also velarized. And it ends up with a double ta, tatma'in, and this is wrong. The right way of pronouncing it is tatma'in, tatma'in, a clear ta and a clear ta. The first one is not velarized, it's attenuated. The second one, which is the ta, is actually velarized. So you should keep the ta attenuated and you shouldn't mix it with the ta. Now we are going to discuss the common mistakes of the dental letters, al-huruf al-lathawiyya, the gum letters. The gum letters are actually a group of the lingual letters and they articulate at this area, at the gum, and hence the name. And the first one of those is the dha. And the dha is characterized by being loud, loose, elevated, adherent, and velarized. It has tafkhim. The second letter is the dhal. And the dhal is characterized of being loud, loose, depressed, open, and attenuated. It has tarqiq. The third letter is the fa. The fa is characterized of being whispered, loose, depressed, open, and attenuated. The dha has a single common mistake, but it's very common. This mistake is common with people who are learning the Arabic for the first time, and as they start to pronounce the Arabic, they find difficulty in pronouncing the dha. So they tend to exchange the dha with a sa or a zay, or a sa with a touch of a zay. Let's listen to the mistake. Al-zalimin, al-zalimin. So it's a mixture of a sa and a za, and it's totally different from the dha. And this is wrong. We should pronounce it like this.
الظالمين
Al-zalimin, zalimin, dha, not sa, not za. So you have to make sure to pronounce the dha from the right articulation point. And dhal also has a single but very common mistake. It's common for non-native Arabic speakers or those who are learning Arabic recently. They tend to replace the dhal and exchange it with a zay. Example of this mistake is وَالزَّاكِرِينَ, وَالزَّاكِرِينَ, za. They pronounce the dha as if it is a za. So they'll say وَالزَّاكِرِينَ. وَالزَّاكِرِينَ is wrong. And the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
ذاكرين
ذَاكِرِينَ, not ذَاكِرِينَ. So you need to make sure to pronounce the dhal from its right articulation point. The tha also has two very common mistakes, and they're very important. Again, people who are either speaking slang Arabic or those who are new to Arabic tend to do these mistakes. So let's take a common example. فَكَثَّرَكُمْ. Notice there is a tha here. فَكَثَّرَكُمْ. Now this tha could be pronounced wrongly in two styles. The first mistake is to pronounce it as a sin. You exchange the tha with a sin, And instead of saying فَكَثَّرَكُمْ, you might be saying فَكَثَّرَكُمْ, فَكَثَّرَكُمْ, sin instead of the tha. This is wrong. A similar other mistake would be to replace the tha of the فَكَثَّرَكُمْ with a ta. And the mistake sounds like this. فَكَثَّرَكُمْ, فَكَثَّرَكُمْ. So we're having ta instead of the tha. And the right way of pronouncing it to correct the two mistakes is like this.
فكثركم
فَكَثَّرَكُمْ. You have to make sure to pronounce the tha from its right articulation point and avoid exchanging it with neither the sin and nor the ta. And now, with the last group of letters, the common mistakes of the whistle letters, حروف الصفير. Whistle letters are actually lingual letters that are related to the area above the lower incisors here. And as the air passes through it, it creates a whistling sound, and that's why they're called whistle letters. The first of these letters is the iz, the zay. The zay is being characterized of being loud, loose, depressed, open, and attenuated. It has tarqiq. The second letter is is, the sin. The sin is characterized of being whispered, loose, depressed, open, and attenuated. It also has tarqiq. The us, the sad, is characterized of being whispered, loose, elevated, velarized, and adherent. This letter has tafkhim. And let's start with the zay mistakes. The first one is weak whistling of the zay. So we shorten the zay and there's no whistling. The right way of pronouncing it is like this.
يزكى
Yazakka. So you have to make sure to give the zay its whistle characteristic. The sin common mistakes. The first one is weak whistling of the sin. Al-masjid. Al-masjid. Quickly, short, sin with no whistle. While the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
المسجد
Al-masjid. So we have to properly give the sin its whistle characteristic. Another example is mixing the sound of the sin with the sound of the zay. Example. Al-mazjur. Al-mazjur. So instead of the sin, we pronounce it as a zay. Al-mazjur. And this is wrong. The proper way of pronouncing it is like this.
مسجور
Masjur. You have to make sure to pronounce the sin free from the zay sound. And the third common mistake for the sin is velarizing the sin to the level that it would sound as if it is a sad. An example of that is يسطرون. يسطرون. We're replacing the sin with the sad. يسطرون. And the reason for that is having the ta. The ta is a velarized letter, and the speaker would subconsciously tend to also velarize the letter preceding it, the sin. And in that, it would result in yasturun. Both will be velarized letters, sad and ta. But this is wrong. This is not a sad, this is a sin. So the right way of pronouncing it is like this.
يسطرون
Yasturun. Sin followed by a ta. Yasturun. So you have to make sure to keep the sin attenuated and avoid mixing it with the sad. And now the sad common mistakes. The first mistake is weak whistling of the sad. As-salihin. Quick, short sad. Short sad. Almost not hearing it. As-salihin. This is wrong. You should give the sad enough whistling. It should be like this.
الصالحين
As-salihin. So you should make sure to give the sad its whistle characteristic. Second common mistake is attenuating the sad so it would sound as if it is a sin. Example. Al-masir. Al-masir. This is not masir. Masir is a totally different word with a different meaning. This is al-masir. So the right way of pronouncing this is
المصير
masir, not masir. So make sure that the sad remains attenuated and avoid mixing it with a sin. The third mistake is pursing the lips while pronouncing the sad. As-salihin. so, as if there is a sad followed by an O. And this is wrong. This is sa. And the proper way of pronouncing it is like this.
الصالحين
As-salihin, not so, but sa. So you avoid pursing the lips upon pronouncing the sa. And with that, we reach to the conclusion of our lesson for today on common pronunciation mistakes of the Arabic letters, where we have revised all the Arabic letters' articulation zones and characteristics, and then we were introduced to the common pronunciation mistakes for each letter and learned how to properly pronounce each letter, avoiding such mistakes while reading the Quran. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that بعونه وقدرته that the Quran Learning Management System, برنامج الجامع لحفظة كتاب الله, would help you, inshallah, to improve your tajweed and improve your tilawa and help you in improving your recitation and help you, if you want, in memorizing the Quran and to help you understand the Quran in the proper way. As we reach the end, we ask المولى عز وجل أن يتقبل منا هذا العمل. We ask Allah Almighty to accept this work from us, and we ask you to make dua for those who participated in making this work come to life and reach you. Hoping you all the best. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.